Hi, hello, book lovers and English learners. Welcome to our October live read along. I'm Lydie Bureau and I'm an English teacher in France. I'm also the founder of Lydie's Book Club, a book club for learners of English. In this book club, I host live readings and workshops on adaptations of classics of literature and contemporary novels in their original text. I also tend to prioritize books that are written by women. And each month we read and explore a different book for all levels of English. And at the end of each reading week, I meet the members of the book club in a live workshop by Zoom to discuss the chapters read over that week. And we also, it is a way for the learners to practice their speaking skills and also develop their critical thinking skills. So if this is something that you feel like you would like to develop, then I invite you to join the book club. Hi, hello, Anael. Welcome to the book club. Welcome to the live, not the book club, but the live. Thank you for joining. How are you? So this month we are reading the C1 Advanced Adaptation of North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. This is a classic of English literature, and we are reading the 2008 Penguin Readers adaptation. So it's been a while that this edition has been done. So if you um, so yeah, so what am I saying? So it's been a while. So hopefully, at some point, Penguin readers will do more recent adaptation of the book. Although this one is already good, but if you look on Penguin Readers' website, you will see that they have done more recent adaptations of classics, and this one is worth readapting again, definitely. So as I mentioned earlier, I host live readings, and I host those live readings on Instagram, and that's why I will be commenting as well as I'm reading. Hi, hello. Hi, thank you for joining this live. Andy 2307. Let me know who you are, and I would love to know more about you and what's your level of English. Anna, yes, nice, good, and you, I'm good. Thank you. I am enjoying the holidays, the school holidays. And you, what did you do over the holiday? What are you doing over the holidays? So I would love to hear you to have some news from you. She is an old student from last year. So if you want to know more about this novel, North and South, and also about its author, Elizabeth Gaskell, I invite you to listen to the podcast episode 25, an introduction to Elizabeth Gaskell and North and South, which is available on this YouTube channel and also on Spotify on the Spotify podcast Reading English. So today it is our final reading session of North and South. So we are going to read chapters 13 and 14 tonight. So this means that not this Saturday. Oh, well, this Saturday I will host the third live workshop session. We will cover chapters 9 to 12, and the following week we will finish completely this discussion on the book, the discussion on this book. With the fourth live workshop. So if you want to attend this live session, the last two live session, you can still join, of course. You just need to follow the link in the description and subscribe to the book club, and then you'll be able to have the Zoom link and all the information and to be able to attend the live. And also, if you're not able to attend the live, you will have access to the recorded session. So you'll still be able to have the content. But obviously, if you want to practice your speaking skills, then you have to be able to, that it's better if you are able to attend the speaking, well, the live Zoom session so that you can practice your speaking. Oh, nice. I'm in Bayonne for the holidays. Good night. See you later. Bye bye. And then thank you for joining and say hi. So the last information that I want to add as well is that you can now purchase the two-part live workshop of Rebecca, which was our September live read along. You don't need to become a member to purchase the recordings of the a workshop that we have done. You just follow the link again in the description. You go to the workshop store page on my website, and you just click on buy on the button to register to buy the workshop, sorry. And then you have your login, and this way you'll be able to have a private access to the recordings of these sessions. So there are two sessions on this book, on this adaptation of Rebecca. So if this is something that you would like to try, there are other live workshops that you can purchase on the website. You just go to the the workshop store session, live. Oh no, oh my God. Tonight, I'm not speaking clearly. So you just need to go to the page, the workshop store page, and you just choose the workshop that you want. Okay, so now I'm going to recap the chapters that we have read last week. So chapters 11 and 12. Before we get into chapter 30, we start reading chapter 13 and 14. So let's refresh our minds and recap a little bit what happened in chapter 11. In this chapter, we learn that Margaret reveals to Mr. Thornton that she lied to the officer, or that that he knows about the fact that she lied to the officer. He doesn't know yet why. She can't say, but yes, he knows perfectly that she lied because he saw her at the station. And she feels bad about the fact that she can't say anything more to him because otherwise it would put her brother in danger. so she keeps quiet, or she doesn't reveal the whole story about her brother uh, to Mr. Thornton. So she keeps it as a secret still. Um, After that, um, so they, so of course, Mr. Thornton is hurt that he feels that there is something off, that she doesn't tell him the truth, the whole truth. And also, he believes that the gentleman who was with her at the station is her lover. He doesn't know that he is Frederick, her brother. So, but you can see that despite his jealousy um, of her brother, of the fact that she might be with someone else, um, he will still do everything that he can to protect her, or um, yeah, in a way, protect her, or yeah, or will do anything to help her as well. After that, uh, what happens? What happened? What we learn uh, also is that Nicholas Higgins, um, now after the death, so we learned that the Boucher, the mother, Mrs. Boucher, the very poor family, died, and now it's Nicholas Higgins who is with his daughter, who are looking after the youngest Boucher children. And Margaret go over to his place to visit him, and also uh, help out. And she was talking about Mr. Thornton. Um, and they're talking about the fact, yeah, that Nicholas Higgins uh, went over to Mr. Thornton, remembered to get a job, and Mr. Thornton refused to talk to him or to give him any position. So he left, and he was telling Margaret about what happened, and Margaret was saying, so says to him that she was very disappointed in Mr. Thornton's reaction. She thought that he would be more compassionate, and would hire him. And when she says that, at this very moment, Mr. Thornton arrives. It was standing behind her, And he heard her saying this, and and he got quite vexed, as you can imagine, with his pride. And eventually he started talking and said that he was actually, after thoughtful reflection, he had heard that he's been waiting for him, that Nicholas Higgins was waiting for him for hours, had been waiting for him for hours before he was able to talk to him. So he um, changed his mind, and he came over to Nicholas Higgins to actually offer him a job in his factory. So he was actually um, uh, he actually changed his mind on Nicholas Higgins. And he saw how determined he was in talking to him and make amends in a way. To make amends means that Nicholas Higgins wanted to uh, apologize in a way, and and wanted um, to show that he was ready to go back to work and follow his rules. So when she heard Mr. Thornton saying that he actually wanted to hire him, she, I guess, felt bad. She didn't say anything. She kept quiet. Um, and then she left. Of course, you can imagine how embarrassed she was after hearing this. Then she left. He followed her outside in the street, and they had a little chat, but they kind of stayed in their own position, and he stayed persuaded that she has a bad image of him, and she she stands on her position, on her thinking that um, he feels feels that she's a liar and that she's not a good person. So in the end, they sort of keep their pride, and they don't become vulnerable and to each other, and especially Margaret, who is in a very tormented, troubled state of mind, because she doesn't want to risk saying too much about her brother. She doesn't want to betray him, so um, she's she doesn't say much. She doesn't want to open up too much to Mr. Thornton, although she would have liked to, but she wants to protect her brother. So she will sacrifice, she's ready to sacrifice her love for Mr. Thornton um, for her brother, to protect her brother. So, which is something that we might not perceive, or to me, this is something that a male character will do. Usually, we would give this kind of uh, um, sacrificial, I don't know, but the fact that it's often uh, the male character that will sacrifice itself over the love of his life. And here we see that she is the character who is going to protect her brother. Oh, she's the protector here, in a way, in her uh, own way. So it shows also a strength in her character. So that's what I like in her, um, in Margaret, in this character. Several months has passed. Mr. Bell, if you remember, he is Mr. Thornton, Mr. Hale, old friend from Oxford. He came over to visit, as he had promised, and he already evokes the fact that if anything happened to Mr. Hell, no, if anything happens to him, he would put Margaret, he would name Margaret as his um, um, beneficiary, or his as his um, heiress. Well, not not like an heir to the throne, but she would inherit his all his money and properties as well. So Margaret uh, is quite surprised, and she doesn't want to believe him. Um, so um, they leave it there, and afterwards, what happens? Um, After that, yeah, he just leaves, and he reminds Margaret that he will always be for her. That's the end of chapter 11. And chapter 12, here again is a very poignant chapter, very because again another tragedy that happens to Margaret, because her father dies. He went over to Mr. Bell's house in Oxford. He went to Oxford to visit his friend Mr. Bell, and overnight he died in his sleep. Um, and only a couple months, maybe, well, several, yeah, I think about, if I remember well, in the original text, it was perhaps 4 or 5 months, not more, um, after Mrs. Hale, Margaret's mother, died. It's her father who dies, and it comes as a terrible shock, because um, um, Margaret, it's so sudden, yes, and Mr. Bell drives back to Milton, to announce the news to Mrs. Hale, well, to Margaret, and when she sees him outside, coming out of the carriage on his own, she understands. She understands that something has happened to her father, and um, and she's heartbroken, as you can imagine. So the cover of the book here represent really what kind of spirit she's at this point of the novel. Yeah. So eventually, the funeral happened in Oxford. But Margaret, I think she is not able to go over there because she's such weak. She's so weak, and Mr. Bell has to arrange everything, and he calls for Mrs. Shaw, so Margaret's aunt, to come over to Milton to look after Margaret and everything about the house. And Miss Shaw, of course, is happy to help her niece, and she also wants to take her back to London. Mr. Bell meets on his way back to Oxford or on his way to Milton. Can't remember. Yeah, I think on his and became a little worried about her father occasionally. Oh yeah. So on his way, on his way to Milton, Mr. Bell meets Mr. Thornton in the train. And he tells him about the dreadful news about Mr. Hale. And as you can imagine, Mr. Thornton is deeply sad about hearing the news. And at the same time, Mr. Bell reveals Mr. Thornton that Margaret will probably leave Milton because her aunt is going to take her back, or and the Lennox's family. Well, anyway, so she's going to go back to London, to her aunt's house. So when her aunt arrives, was not well enough to travel to Oxford. Yeah, so Margaret didn't go to the funeral. She was too weak. And when her aunt arrives in Milton, of course, she hates the town and she wants to get over with everything as quickly as possible. And they go over to Mrs. Thornton to say goodbye, and also to Higgins. She says goodbye to him as well. Well, yeah, she says goodbye to everyone. And at this point, Mrs. Thornton also learns about the existence of Frederick, her brother, from Mr. Bell, because at Mr. Thornton Mm, mm. I think Mr. Bell came back to Milton, and Mr. Thornton offered, yeah, because Mrs. Shaw was staying at the Hell's house. So Mr. Bell didn't have anywhere else to stay. So Mr. Thornton offered him to stay at their house, and there. Um, when he was chatting with Mr. Thornton, he revealed that Frederick, that he was sorry that her brother couldn't claim her, be well to be responsible of her, and Mr. Thornton suspects that he was there when. He asks Mr. Bell if he was there when Mrs. Hale died. And obviously Mr. Bell says that no, he's in Spain, so he can be, uh, it's not possible for him to come back to England. So he's not aware that Frederick came back to England secretly. Um, And Mr. Bell suspects as well that Mr. Thornton could perhaps had feelings for could perhaps have feelings for Margaret, but reserved as Mr. Thornton is, he doesn't reveal anything. Just mentions that she's beautiful, and doesn't expand much on his feelings, and how he sees her truly, how he truly feels about her. Um, well, he doesn't want to again stir the feelings, the hurtful feelings about her, his love for her, knowing that she rejected him. And yes, that's about it. And Margaret is off to London now. Chapter 13, New Life. This is it. Okay, a new life. Edith gave birth to her second child and, as was the custom, remained quietly in her room for several weeks afterwards. Consequently, the house in Harley Street was less busy than usual, and Margaret was able to rest and try to understand the sudden change that had taken place in her life. Once again, she was well looked after and living in a luxurious house. Mrs. Shaw and Edith were delighted that she had returned home, and Captain Lennox was kind and brotherly to her. Margaret felt that it was almost ungrateful of her to have a secret feeling that the Helston vicarage and even the little house in Milton were much more like her idea of home. Hmm. So if you can imagine, all of a sudden, her life after the death of her father, her life was turned upside down. She had to leave um, a stable, a life that she started that was beginning to be a little bit stable, and now back again to London, and to have to move out and look, and another, it's uh, again the unknown for her, what's going to happen to her without any family except were her aunt and cousin, and yeah, and the friends that she had made in Milton. Um, so it's a little bit like she had to start all over again. Just as she was starting to feel bored, Edith came downstairs and the normal life of the household began again, as she used to do. Margaret answered her cousin's notes for her and reminded her of her social engagements. She loved playing with Sholto, Edith's little boy, and looked after both children while the servants had lunch. But because of her father had died so recently, she was not yet able to go out socially. And while the rest of the family went out almost every day, she was often left alone. Then her thoughts returned to Milton, and she compared her life there with her comfortable life in Harley Street. She was becoming bored and was afraid that she would forget that there was a world of servants and workers, with all their hopes and fears. There seemed to be an emptiness in her life now. When she suggested this to Edith, her cousin stroked her cheek and said, "Poor child! Soon, when Henry returns from his travels, we will start having dinner parties again, and you will feel more cheerful. Poor darling." But Margaret did not feel that dinner parties were the answer to her problems. Dixon was still in Milton, and Margaret missed her greatly. She read the servant's letter eagerly, hoping for news of friends. Dixon mentioned Mr. Thornton quite frequently, as he often gave her advice about the house business affairs. Then, at the end of June, when the house in Milton had been sold, she came to London in her new role as Margaret's servant. So Dixon comes over to London to be Margaret's maid now. She brought a lot of Milton gossip with her. Fanny Thornton had got married and had had a very grand wedding paid by her brother. Dixon had organized a sale of furniture, and Mrs. Thornton had bought several pieces and paid too little, while while Mr. Thornton had bought others and paid too much. She did not have much to say about the Higgins family, but believed that Nicholas was well. She had heard that Mary had gone to work at Mr. Thornton's mill as a cook, which sounded strange to her. Why did the mill need a cook? So also there is information that Margaret doesn't know about is the fact that since Nicholas Higgins started working for Mr. Thornton, they had started to have conversation, and so Mr. Thornton and Higgins and Nicholas Higgins started to become quite friendly to one another. And Higgins suggested that perhaps the workers could have better working condition in having or could be more productive if they had food, because a lot of them did not did not have enough to buy food and eat properly before going to work. So Mr. Thornton invested in building a canteen, sort of a canteen, and provide meals for the workers. So which you can see here again, Elizabeth Gaskell's social advancement, or how she shows what could be the solutions for a better living condition for and working conditions for the workers in the 19th century. So I wonder whether some manufacturers had already thought about this idea of creating a canteen, or is it Mrs. Gaskell imagining this project in her novel, and wanting for this way of well, for this project to develop, perhaps that manufacturers could have the idea through the novel, or I don't know how this could inspire manufacturers. Um, is it something? If you listen to the podcast on the introduction on the book, the podcast 25 about the introduction of the book, and Elizabeth Gaskell, um, she was a woman who was very much involved in the social life, and often in contact with social workers and charities. So perhaps that um, they imagined some um, solutions to improve the working and living conditions of the poor and of the working class. So this is something that's worth exploring, I guess. Right, let's continue. Henry Lennox, who had been doing legal work in another part of the country, returned to London, and, as he had done in the past, spent a lot of time in Harley Street. He seemed even cleverer than before, although Margaret thought he had become colder. But the two shared similar intellectual interest, and unlike Edith and the captain, they enjoyed discussing a variety of subjects. So it seems that Edith and the captain didn't really talk much. So they're married, the couple. Indeed, Margaret suspected that Mr. Lennox felt slightly contemptuous of his brother and sister-in-law and their aimless way of life. He and Margaret often saw each other, but always in the presence of others, and this helped them to relax and forget their embarrassment. Margaret suspected that Mr. Lennox tried to avoid being alone with her, but when he had made a particular clever remark, she noticed that he would glance at her as if he wanted to know what she thought of it. Mr. Bell wrote frequently, and in August, Margaret received a letter from him saying that he would visit her the following week. For several months, he had been complaining that he felt unwell, and some days before his visit, he wrote to say that he would come on Wednesday instead of Monday. But on Wednesday, he did not appear. And the next morning, a letter arrived from his servant. And next morning, a letter arrived from his servant explaining that Mr. Bell had postponed his visit because he had suddenly felt ill. Then, at the time that he was supposed to leave for London, he had suffered a heart attack, and the doctors did not think he would survive the night. Margaret received this letter at breakfast time, and her face went very pale as she read it. She silently put the letter into Edith's hands and left the room. Her cousin was very shocked by the news and started to cry. When she had recovered a little, she went upstairs and found Dixon packing a small case. Margaret was putting on her hat, was sobbing, her hands trembling so much that she could hardly tie the strings. It was quickly agreed that Captain Lennox would accompany her to Oxford, and before midday, the two were sitting in a train carriage. They arrived at Mr. Bell's house and learned that he had died during the night. So here again, another death of a close relative. No, I think he was, yes, something that I didn't mention is apparently, as far as I remember from the original text, he was her godfather. It's not mentioned in this adaptation, but he was also her godfather. So this is also one of the reasons why he wanted so much Margaret to inherit his legacy. No. They arrived at well, the news could not have been worse, but Margaret was glad she was able to see the room where her father had died, and that she could say a quiet goodbye to the cheerful old man who had loved her so much. Captain Lennox, sorry, fell asleep on the journey home, and Margaret spent the time crying and thinking of how, in the last year, she had lost her mother, her father, and now Mr. Bell. It seemed too much to bear. But then she arrived in Harley Street, and Edith and her aunt were so kind and gentle, and little Sholto was so happy to see her that she began to feel better. And by the time she went up to bed, she was able to thank God that her dear old friend had suffered so little. Will Margaret inherit Mr. Bell's money? Whispered Edith to her husband when she was alone with him that night. The captain, however, had no idea and did not think that Mr. Bell had much money at all. Edith was disappointed to hear this, but a week later she came dancing towards her husband and said, I am right, and you're wrong, sir. Margaret has had a lawyer's letter, and she will inherit about £2,000, and also Mr. Bell's property in Milton, which is worth about £40,000. She will be a rich woman. And what does she say about it? Oh, she has no she has known about it for some months, apparently, but had no idea it was so much. She says she is afraid of the money, but that's nonsense, and she'll soon get used to it. It seems natural that Henry Lennox would be Margaret's legal advisor, and he often came to her with papers that needed signing. So Henry Lennox, the brother of the captain, is a lawyer. So he also tried to help her brother, Frederick, Margaret's brother, to defend him and find some witnesses to avoid him to go to prison. Um, but he couldn't find any more witnesses willing uh, to uh, um, say that to talk in favor of Margaret's brother. So they eventually did not pursue the case. Well, he didn't pursue the case much. Henry, said Edith one day, with a little smile, do you know how I expect your long conversations with Margaret to end? No, I don't, he said, reddening. And I don't wish to tell you, and I don't wish you to tell me. What are you thinking of? What you're thinking of may or may not happen. Please don't say anything to Margaret. She's been quite cool to me for a long time and is only just beginning to be kind. Autumn came, and the family went on holiday to Cromer, a pretty town on the east coast. Margaret's troubles had made her quite weak, and the fresh sea air was just what she needed. She spent long hours sitting on the beach, and the gentle sound of the waves, and the beauty of the sea and sky calmed her spirit. While Aunt Shaw went shopping and Edith and Captain Lennox went horse riding, Margaret thought about her time in Milton. Her greatest regret was that Mr. Thornton had never learned the truth. about why she had lied. But slowly, she began to realize that she had a future, and her face, which had looked so pale and tight with pain, began to change. After 3 weeks, Henry Lennox, who had been in Scotland on business, came to join them, and he immediately noticed that the difference in Margaret. The sea has done Miss Hale a lot of good, he said one afternoon when she had left the room. She looks 10 years younger than she did in Harley Street. It's the hat that I got her. It's the hat I got her, said Edith delightedly. I knew it would suit her the moment I saw it. I'm sorry, said Mr. Lennox, but I believe I know the difference between a pretty dress and a pretty woman. No hat could make Miss Hale's eyes so bright and her lips so red. Her face is full of peace and light. She is even more beautiful than, he lowered his voice, the Margaret Hale of Helston. From this time, the clever and ambitious man used all his powers to win Margaret. He loved her intelligent mind and her sweet beauty, and so the money she had inherited as only one part of her, although it could help him in his career. Very, very thorough thinking, this young man. On his way back down from Scotland, he had visited Milton on business connected with Margaret, and it was clear to him that her property there was increasing in value. He was glad that in their new relationship of client and legal advisor, he had many opportunities to talk to her. Margaret was very willing to listen, providing he talked about Milton. And she was delighted that he admired its inhabitants almost more than she did. He praised their energy and their courage, and noticed that when Margaret got bored, if he mentioned Milton, her eyes would brighten, and she would smile warmly at him. During her long hours of thinking on the beach, Margaret had realized that her life was her responsibility and no one else's. The results, this is very modern as well to say that to show that Margaret realizes that she owns her life, and she's not, and she can only look, that's, she's the only person that can look after herself, not a father, not a brother, not a husband. She is responsible for her life, for her happiness, and that's it seems so natural, so obvious to us in our society, in our 21st century society. But can you believe at the time, in the 19th century, this is not the prerogative of a woman. This is not her purpose. She needs to be, and in some countries, still to this day, a woman belongs to either a father, to the father, and then or to a brother, and then eventually to a husband as well. She always be the property of a male and not herself. Be our own owner, the owner. She would not have ownership on her body and her life. And that's a turning point here in this novel, because you perceive here that now she owns, and she's a rich woman now. So she doesn't need any male figure in her life to do whatever she wants. And this is the power of money, I guess. The empowering, or the empowerment of women's freedom. And you can see, in so many ways, how the women who inherited wealth from her family, or who were in a position in which they could be, they had wealth from their own, inherit from her own family, and not being rich from her husband. A lot of these women had the privilege to either stay single or never marry, or to marry very late in life and choose the husband that she wanted. So their wealth allowed so much freedom to these women compared to others who didn't have the choice. Um, where was I? Margaret had realized that her life was her responsibility and no one else's. The result was that when the family returned to London, she told her aunt that she wanted to visit the poor and sick, as she had done in Helston. Mrs. Shaw did not wish to allow this at first, but Margaret was so sweetly persuasive that eventually she agreed. In their private conversations, Captain Lennox and Mrs. Shaw decided that it would be helpful to Henry if Margaret did not go out much socially. Margaret had other admirers, but her lack of interest in them was very obvious. They had noticed that Henry was the only man she really enjoyed talking to, and slowly the two became closer to each other. Chapter 14 now, meeting again. So, guys, this is the last chapter now. The big reveal of what's gonna happen with Margaret, what's gonna be her future, what's um standing in front of her, what's what will come next for her. Okay. Meanwhile, in Milton, Mr. Thornton's financial troubles were growing more and more serious. The strike, more than a year and a half ago, had meant that he was unable to complete some of his business contracts. So here, a whole year and a half has passed, you see, since the first strike. What made things worse was that in recent months, the commercial value of cotton had fallen. Mr. Thornton's business was very badly affected, and he had spent a lot of money on expensive new machinery, with the result that now he did not have money when he needed it. No new orders were coming in, and meanwhile there were the huge expenses of paying the workers and manufacturers the mill and the huge expenses of paying the workers and maintaining the mill. Mr. Thornton did not despair, however. He was as calm and gentle to the women in his home as he had always been. He did not say much to his workers, but they understood his situation and were sympathetic. His relationship with them had changed greatly. Previously, his only ambition had been to be head of a firm that was known and respected all over the world. Now he often talked to the workers, particularly Higgins, and listened to what they had to say. These conversations had made him realize that people everywhere were connected by the same human feelings. He had begun to see that, as a manufacturer, he was in a position to help and influence those less fortunate than him. He had even arranged to send the older Boucher children to school. Now, though it seemed that he might lose this position, just as he was beginning to understand it. Yeah, that's quite And a sad turn of event now that he started to understand other people, or the workers, and how the world works. He can't he can't keep up with the factory. One afternoon, as Mr. Thornton, it feels a little bit too late almost. One afternoon, as Mr. Thornton was walking down Marlborough Street, absorbed in his thoughts, Higgins approached him, noticing that the mill owner was looking even gloomier than usual. Higgins tried to think of something to cheer him up. Have you heard any news from Miss Margaret lately? He asked. Miss who? Replied Mr. Thornton. Miss Margaret, Miss Hale, the clergyman's daughter. Oh, Miss Hale. Suddenly, the worried look left Mr. Thornton's face, and he smiled warmly. I'm her tenant now, you know, Higgins. I hear about her from her lawyer every now and then. She's well and living with friends. Thank you, Higgins. Will she be coming to Milton again? No. Higgins came closer to Mr. Thornton and said in low tone, How? In low tone, how is the young gentleman? Seeing that the mill owner did not seem to understand, he continued, The young gentleman? I mean Frederick, her brother, who came to Milton. He came to Milton? Yes, when their mother died. Don't be afraid. I tell anyone. Mary told me. She found out about it when she was working at the house. And he was here. It was her brother? Yes. I thought you knew all about it, or I would never have said anything. I won't say another word. The conversation ended, and Mr. Thornton continued on his way, saying to himself, It was her brother. I'm so glad. I may never see her again, but it is a relief to know that. I knew she could never have done anything wrong, but I needed to be sure. I'm so glad. I bet he is glad, definitely. This news was a little golden thread in his fortunes. Several American firms that he did business with had failed, and his financial situation was becoming more and more gloomy. Night after night, Mr. Thornton took his papers into his office and sat there long after his mother had gone to bed. One morning, when the first light of day was beginning to creep into the room, he realized that nothing could be done. He would have to give up the business that he had worked so hard to make a success. It's quite tragic what's happening to Mr. Thornton here. One hot summer evening, Edith came into Margaret's room, dressed for dinner. Margaret, I need to talk to you. Henry has come to me and asked me if Mr. Thornton of Milton, your tenant, you know, can join our dinner party tonight. It is such a nuisance. The arrangements were perfect, and now they must be changed. I won't have dinner tonight. I don't want any, said Margaret in a low voice. Dixon can bring me a cup of tea here. I'll be really glad to lie down. You can't do that. We need you. Mr. Coldhurst, who is a member of Parliament, is coming, and you know we planned for you to talk to him about Milton. Oh, I've just remembered. This Mr. Thornton comes from Milton. How fortunate. Mr. Coldhurst is going to talk about the cotton industry in his next speech. He and Mr. Thornton will have a lot to say to each other. Really, I think Henry has done very well. I asked him if Mr. Thornton is a man one should be ashamed of. He said, Not if you have any sense, little sister. So I suppose he can pronounce his H's. So I guess here this comment from Edit about, I suppose he can pronounce it H's, is because in the north of England, um, well, working class, I would say, um, people coming from the working class didn't have an accent, and they, it seems that they don't pronounce the H's. Well, when the in English you have to um, um, read the H's like house, you see. So probably she refers to the fact that he is able to speak proper English and not some slang or some with an accent that is not proper and can articulate himself properly in society. Did Mr. Lennox say why Mr. Thornton had come to London? Asked Margaret, her voice sounding rather tight. Oh, his business has failed, and something like that, or something like that. I'm sure Henry told you that. The day you had such a headache. Anyway, he has said that Mr. Thornton has lost all his money and deserves our respect, and I must be very polite to him. And as I have no idea how to do that, I need you to help me. And now come down with me and rest on the sofa for half an hour. So here there is a reversal of power dynamic here because now it's Mr. Thornton, the one who is penniless, and Margaret, who is her landlord first and who is rich. So I quite like that power dynamic change. Which is not always the case. It's often, well, the young woman that is poor, and that makes me think about Jane Eyre's novel, Charlotte Bronte's novel, Jane Eyre, who is Jane starts, well, the novel starts with Jane being poor, being the governors, and poor, and towards the end she inherits money from this uncle that she's never met, and she becomes rich, and Mr. Not Thornton, but Mr. Rochester lose the castle, and well, it's the Thornfield Hall, the big house, and he loses everything and his money. So she becomes rich, and she goes to rescue him. So here again, you see the parallel, and I love it. Henry Lennox came early, and Margaret, blushing as she spoke, asked him some questions about Mr. Thornton. He can't afford to continue his payments for Marlborough Mills and the house, so he has come to discuss what can be done. I thought you would like him to come to the dinner party. Mr. Lennox had lowered his voice as he spoke to Margaret. Then, noticing that Mr. Thornton had just entered, he jumped up and introduced him to Edith and Captain Lennox. Margaret watched Mr. Thornton anxiously as he talked to them. She had not seen him for a long time, and his circumstances had changed completely. Being tall and well-built, he looked as impressive as ever. But there were lines of worry on his face that had not been there before. Still, thought Margaret, he had nobleness and strength that made people respect him immediately. Mr. Thornton's first glance around the room had shown him that Margaret was there. He had seen how carefully she listened to Mr. Lennox and came up to her with the calm, friendly manner of an old friend. She blushed and the color did not leave her cheeks for the rest of the evening. But she did not seem to have much to say to him, and when others approached her, he moved away and began talking to Miss Lennox. Mr. Hale is looking very well, is she not? Said Mr. Lennox. I don't think Milton was very good for her. When she first came to London, I thought I had never seen anyone so changed. Tonight she's looking wonderful, and she is so much stronger now. Last autumn, a 2-mile walk made her tired. On Friday, we walked for 6 miles at least. Um, on Friday, we walked. Oh, sorry, it was Mr. Lennox who was saying that. I thought it was Mr. Thornton. So last autumn, a 2-mile walk made her tired. On Friday, we walked for 6 miles at least. We? Who? Just the two of them? Um, that's Mr. Thornton. Well, who? We? Who? Just the two of them? Wondered Mr. Thornton. Dinner began, and during the meal, Mrs. Colthurst, the Member of Parliament, heard enough of Mr. Thornton's conversation to want to meet him. He asked Edith who the gentleman was, and when she told him that he was Mr. Thornton of Milton, he was Mr. exclaimed, he was Mr. Thornton of Milton, exclaimed, Mr. Thornton of Milton, clearly recognizing the name. He exclaimed, okay, Mr. Thornton of Milton, clearly recognizing the name. Edith was pleased, and dinner party was going well. Henry was being amusing, and Mr. Thornton and Mr. Colthurst were busy talking in a corner of the room. Margaret did not speak much, but was looking so beautiful that it did not matter. She was watching Mr. Thornton's face and noticing the changes in him. He only smiled once, that brilliant smile that she remembered so well, and he glanced at her, almost as if he wanted her approval. But then his expression changed, and he avoided looking at her again. After dinner, the ladies went upstairs, and Margaret, who did not feel like talking, started to do some sewing. The gentlemen soon followed, and as Mr. Colthurst and Mr. Thornton were standing near her, she was able to listen to their conversation. My business is failed, Mr. Thornton said, and I am looking for a position in Milton where I can experiment with some ideas that I have. What experiments are these? Asked Mr. Colthurst respectfully. I now believe that an organization can be much more successful if the employers and workers talk freely to one another and see each other as people. If an employer has a new plan, the workers may not realize how carefully he has thought about it. But if he discusses it with his workers, they will feel they are part of it and will want it to be successful. And you think this may prevent strikes? Not at all, but it might mean that the strikers aren't so bitter and so full of hatred. Suddenly, Mr. Thornton turned and walked up to Margaret, as if he knew she was listening. Miss Hale, he said, I had a letter from some of my men saying that they wished to work for me if I was ever in a position to employ them again. That was good, wasn't it? Yes. How wonderful. I'm so glad, said Margaret. She looked straight at him with her expressive eyes, then looked down when he looked back at her. He gazed at her for about a minute, as if he did not know what to say next. And he sighed and said, I knew you would be pleased, and turned away and did not speak to her again until he wished her good night very formally. As Mr. Lennox was leaving, Margaret said hesitantly, Can I speak to you tomorrow? I want your help about something. Certainly, I will come at whatever time you wish. At 11? I will see you then. His eyes brightened with pleasure. How she was learning how she was learning to depend on him. It seemed as if any day now she would make her feelings about him clear, and then he could once again ask her to marry him. Edith moved around the house very quietly the next morning, as if any sudden noise would disturb the meeting that was taking place in the sitting room. 2 o'clock came, and Margaret and Mr. Lennox still sat there behind closed doors. Then there was the sound of a man's footstep running downstairs. Edith opened the sitting room door. Well, Henry, she said. Well, what? He said rather shortly. Come in to lunch. No, thank you, I can't. I've lost too much time here already. Then it's not all settled? Said Edith sadly. No, not at all. If you mean what I think you mean, it will never happen. Edith, so give up thinking about it. If Margaret lived near me, it would be so nice for us all, said Edith, who did not want Henry to give up hope. At the moment, I'm always afraid she will go and live in Cadiz. So remember, Cadiz is where where Margaret's brother lives. I'm certain that Miss Hale would not marry me, and I shall not ask her. Then what have you been talking about? Business matters. Oh, go away if that's all. I shall. I'm coming again tomorrow, and bringing Mr. Thornton with me, as he needs to talk to Miss Hale. Mr. Thornton? Why? He is Miss Hale's tenant, said Mr. Lennox, turning away, and he can no longer afford to rent the mill. Ooh, big trouble. No one ever knew why Mr. Lennox did not keep his appointment the following day. Mr. Thornton arrived punctually after he had waited for nearly an hour. Margaret came in looking very anxious, very white and anxious. I'm so sorry Mr. Lennox is not here, she said hurriedly. He could have done it so much better. He is my adviser in this. I'm sorry if it worries you. Shall I try to find him? No, thank you. I wanted to tell you how sorry I am that I am going to lose you as a tenant. But Mr. Lennox has told me that he feels sure you will regain your former position. Please don't speak until I've finished. Margaret turned over some papers in a trembling, hurried manner and continued. Oh, here it is. He has written a document showing that if you would borrow some money of mine, about 18,000, that is lying unused in the bank, you could pay me better interest than I have now, and Marlborough Mills could continue. So here, this is amazing here. She is offering him to invest in his company. So can you believe that they now speak on the same as equal, really, and as business partners? So this is so modern when you think about it. Mr. Thornton did not speak, and she went on looking for some papers, as if she was very anxious that he would see the arrangement as being advantageous for her. But her heart almost seemed to stop beating when Mr. Thornton said, in a voice that trembled with passion, Margaret. He looked up and then tried to hide her expressive eyes by hiding her head in her hands. He came nearer and said her name again in the same passionate way. Her head sank even lower. He came close to her and knelt by her side and whispered, Be careful. If you do not speak, I shall claim you as my own. Send me away at once, if I must go, Margaret. She turned and laid his head on her shoulder. Still with her face in her hands, it was delicious for him to feel her soft cheek against him. He held her close, but they did not speak. Finally, she whispered, Oh, Mr. Thornton, I'm not good enough. Not good enough? It is I am not who am not good enough. After a minute or two, he gently removed her hands from her face and put her arms around his shoulders as they had been on the day of the riot. Do you remember, love? He asked. Yes, and I remember how cruel I was to you the next day. Lift your head. I have something to show you. Blushing, she raised her head. Do you recognize these roses? He asked, taking some dead flowers out of a book that he had with him. No, she replied. Did I give them to you? No, you did not. But you have probably worn roses like these. She looked at them, thought for a minute, then smiled a little and said, They are from Helston, are they not? Oh, have you been there? When did you go? I wanted to see the place where Margaret grew up, even when I had no hope of winning you. I went there after I returned from France. You must give them to me, she said, trying to take them out of his hand. You may have them, but you must pay me for them. How can I ever? So here it's quite funny. They're joking here. You may have them, but you must pay me for them. So there's always an exchange, a business exchange here. How can I ever tell Aunt Shaw? She whispered, after some minutes of delicious silence. Then we speak to her. Oh no, I should tell her. But what will she say? I can guess. She will exclaim, That man! Be careful, said Margaret, or I will imitate the way your mother. Be careful, said Margaret, or I will imitate the way your mother will say, That woman. And this is the end. This is it. Um, and I quite like the way they have adapted. It's very uh, um, loyal, I would say, not loyal, but very respectful uh, to the novel, the original text, and um, the end um, represent exactly on what their relationship is based on, and the fact that they don't really need grand declaration um, to express their love, their deep, profound, and true love to each other. Um, although overall, I guess from the moment they met, it's 2 years passed, but more, a bit more, even. So you can see that although everything that happened, um, they found each other and they love didn't fade, and you can see from um, the way she leaned on him and how she said, "Do you remember, love?" And here he dares. He at this point when she leaned uh, towards him, lean on him, um, and there is a closer contact between the two. He feels that she's open now, and he can dare showing his feelings, and the fact that I guess she's ready to invest in his factory, and believes in him, shows the love that she has for him. But here again, it's him displaying his love to her in words more than she does. She's much more reserved in her feelings than he is. Um, she does it by her acts, her actions, um, like investing in his money, in his company, and doing and staying loyal to him, more than in her words. So she keeps her pride and and her grace in a way. So yeah, that's it. I hope that you enjoyed learning more, well, reading this novel and learning more about the the bigger picture of and the vision of Mrs. Gaskell, of Elizabeth Gaskell's message in this novel, and see how progressive this novel was. It's almost like a manifesto for um, social improvements, uh, living and working conditions improve, so that the living and the working conditions of the working class could um, improve, and be example and become examples, because we see that from Mr. Thornton's innovation in creating a canteen and developing communication with his workers, and finding a new way to manage his company, has had echoes in the business world, and he's known, and his way of working is known in the whole world, and especially in London, in the trading community and up to the parliament. You can see that Mr. Thornton has influence at the parliament, although he's completely broke, and his manufacture is completely falling apart. It doesn't have any more money. That doesn't impact on his um, social, on the perception of his character um, in London society, and in the even in the up to the government, and the power decision, and where the decision are made, so in the politics. So you can see how all his effort had paid off in a way, in the positive and in the positive way for social improvements in the country, and also in the business and the way um, business management has to evolve, and the condition of the workers, leading the way to um, a new model of business in a way. So he's leading this new phase of the industrial revolution in a way. So yeah, here Elizabeth Gaskell is making her little revolution in the world of industry uh, with this novel, and I'm uh, I'm sorry that I don't think that, I mean, in more specifically in the popular culture, that this novel is not uh, doesn't have the notoriety that it should have, in terms, and also in the public sphere, or in the, well, in not a public sphere, but or as a reference for uh, for business strategies, and I don't know. To me, this novel should be more recognized as um, sort of a manual for business, for you, for people wanting to learn about business and industry, and know more about the history of the industrial revolution. Um, so I think, especially for beginners, in a way, for people wanting to know more about how the Industrial Revolution evolved, and understand how it came to that stage of our modern society. So, yeah, this novel is so underrated, I would say. Um, because it says so much more than just the relationship between Margaret, and the romance between Margaret and Mr. Thornton. And you can see it throughout the novel that, well, it really, nothing happens except the moment that he reveals his love to her. Well, months and months happen without nothing happening between them. It took them 2 years to really reach that point where they will be on the same level, and they will feel as equal, especially for Margaret, and she will feel like she in a position where she can choose him. She chooses him. So it takes many months, and the whole book is not just about their love story. Far from it, way far from it. And I'm sorry that, and I'm quite angry about the fact that it's often the only thing that we remember from this, that people, when we mention about North and South, and how people always refer to, oh, this is the love story, blah blah blah. No, it's yes, part of it is, but in every in so many novels you will have a little bit of love interest. But that doesn't reduce the novel to that particular love story. And and when critics are more balanced, they can see that and they will uh, put forward or enlight the major parts of the novel, the or the very significant element in this novel, like the vision that Mr. Thornton that gets influenced from Margaret, and also how he evolves from the beginning of the novel, and how Margaret, in a way, also start changing her views on trade workers, well, trade men, and the whole world of trading. Um, and commerce. So, um, as you can see, this novel takes you really into this world of the Industrial Revolution, and also gives some clues and well, gives some guidance. It's almost like a guide for manufacturers, um, and um, and the discussions between the worker, between Mr. Higgins and Margaret, and Higgins and Mr. Thornton, are so enlightened and so interesting as well, and challenging in a way. They challenge each other. So I guess this this revisiting of I hope that revisiting this novel will shine a new light on this book and on Elizabeth Gaskell work as a whole. She wrote many other books. She was a very prolific writer, although she started late in her in her in life. Um, Unfortunately, there's only North and South that has been adapted. Uh, so hopefully more will be like Wives and Daughters. I hope that this book will be adapted at some point. This, which is also a classic of one of her classic and one of her most popular books. So I hope that it will be accessible to more readers and more learners of English, of course. Right. I will stop here. I really hope that you enjoyed this live reading and this book as well, as much as I do. And make sure that you subscribe to the book club membership to attend the last two live workshops. So one is happening this Saturday, and the last workshop will happen the following Saturday. So I really hope that you will be able to join us. Have a beautiful end of the day, and I will see you next month. Little reveal today, because next month we will read a new book, of course, a new classic of American literature this time. Bye, Katie. Thank you. We will start a new book. We will read The Age of Innocence from the novelist Edith Wharton, this American writer. Again, such a powerful story here. So we will meet again next month live to read The Age of Innocence. Bye. Bye bye.